Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maximo and I'm here checking out the Double Dragon and Kunio-Kun Retro Brawler Bundle. I believe this has a few different names depending on what region you got it from, but that's the name that we're talking about here. This is the version that's about to be released in the West, by the way. So, this has been out for a while in other regions like Japan, and I believe it's also been out in like Asian English regions as well for a little while, but this is the first time the series is coming over to the West, and by this series I mean Kunio-Kun, because Double Dragon definitely has been over here for a while. Hello, it's me from the future, and I just wanted to pop in and tell you what this collection actually is, because I don't think I actually did in the intro. So, this is a collection of primarily Technos Japan games. Technos were a developer through the 80s and 90s. They made two franchises of note: Double Dragon, a brawler with 3 entries in it that it's well known across the world, and Kunio-Kun, an entire franchise of games with an interwoven story about high schoolers beating the crap out of each other in various locales, sports, and time periods. The franchise was well known in Japan, but only got 3 localizations outside of it under different names, and they felt relatively unconnected. Technos eventually went bankrupt in 1996. The rights to both of these franchises eventually ended up with Arc System Works, who are now doing the entirety of the Double Dragon and Kunio-Kun series as they were on the NES and Famicom in this collection. There were more Kunio-Kun games on platforms like the Super Nintendo and the Game Boy, but this is basically what you get. And there is Double Dragon 4 and Double Dragon Neon and what have you, but none of them are here either. So, anyway, back to the video. I have got my hands on a copy of this. I've played through all the games, at least a little bit. I have only played them for like a couple of rounds each, just to, see what they're like. But, well, I have been through everything. I have tried everything, so I like to think I can give you a little bit of an idea of what's going on. Go have a look at the settings first, because there's a few notable ones here. You can select a character and a nickname if you feel like it. I don't know why you would do this. It seems unnecessary. You also have the ability to change the background of specific games if you don't plan on stretching the video to the entire screen. I haven't, although it's kind of annoying you have to do it for every individual game. So you can set a few display modes, including scan lines. You can see what I've been working with here. It's not much, but it's something. Demo and prevent screen burn-in, those are also nice if you leave the game on the heads-up display. You can change the controls, which I recommend you do, because by default they have start and select on X and Y, which feels a bit weird, especially when you can easily remap button 1 and button 2 to the Y button, because there are a lot of games in this collection that use both buttons at once for multiple things, so having a separate button for it is actually quite useful. And their implementation of it is actually pretty damn good in this. It doesn't, like, trip up and only recognize one button of the 2. It does pretty well in that sense. You've also got button 5 and 6, which are chat and menu, but just remap them to, like, the shoulder buttons or something and you'll be fine. And you've also got sound, but no real need to worry about that too much, although they do have some decent sound options there. So you can play these online. I haven't been able to do that because this is a pre-release copy, so I don't have anyone who would own this game anyway. And you've also got achievements, some pretty basic stuff, nothing too far out of the ordinary. Some of them are quite interesting, but, well, it's fine, really. It gives you a little bit of extra stuff to do. So if we hit offline play, we can see the overall setup of the interface. So it turns out that remapping the controls also remaps the UI controls. As to why this happens, I have no idea, but that's just what they chose to do. So you have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, something like 18 games, but here's the thing, some of these games are actually, well, I say identical, but it's the same game, but the localized version. So, for example, you've got Neketsu Renegade Kunio-Kun, and then you've just got the version of Renegade, which is, like, it's not a bad idea in the grand scheme of things, but there's no way for you to see, like, imagine if you're a new person playing this and you see 2 different games like this and then you play them and you're like, oh, these are just the same game. Might be a little weird, I gotta say. This also applies to high school dodgeball and super dodgeball. This also applies to River City Ransom and Downtown Neketsu Story. And it's a bit weird because in the case of like Downtown Neketsu Story and River City Ransom, all of the Japanese games have been localized into English via what appears to be ROM hacks. So it's a little bit weird playing River City. I went through in release order, so I played Downtown Neketsu Story first, then I played River City Ransom. And they're both localized in English, but the Japanese one that's been localized into English feels just that little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for, lazily done. Like they didn't put too much effort into writing the dialogue or anything. It's a little weird when you go and play it. It's hard to explain, you kind of have to experience it yourself. So you have the option to sort by things like release date, device, playtime, and number of plays in recent play, and of course title. Device only sorts by the American versions and the Japanese versions because technically these are all on the same device because these are all the NES port. Well, I say ports, but they're probably the original versions. These are all the NES and Famicom versions, so you're not going to get any of the Kunio-Kun SNES games, you're not going to get anything like River City Ransom EX for the Game Boy Advance. It's all the Nintendo stuff, and strangely enough, there is zero reference to Nintendo, Nintendo Entertainment System, Famicom, or anything like that in any of these localizations. They refer to all the buttons as button 1 and button 2 for A and B. So, it's a little bit strange in that regard. And it kind of makes me miss the fact that some of those games aren't included, like River City Rampage EX. Ransom EX, I apologize, it's one of the two. If you wanted to get really, like, weird, you could get, like, the arcade versions of Double Dragon 1 and 2. You could get the arcade version of Renegade. You could get, even if you wanted to get really weird, get the bloody ZX Spectrum version of Renegade and its sequel, Target Renegade. Those games are actually pretty good. There's nothing wrong with those games at all. I've actually played those. But yeah, it's a bit weird. It's all entirely NES. They also have done a couple of weird things, like for example, the quality up. If we hit the start button and go into the game description, you can see that there's a high quality version changes. It reduces the lag and flickering, and it has some bug fixes. And that's pretty much the case for all of these, except for games like Super Dodgeball and its Japanese equivalent, because they actually make balance changes. It's a little bizarre, if I'm being honest. They also don't include things like manuals. Now, if I just go into, say, Neketsu Renegade Kunio-Kun for a little bit, and hit the menu button, you can load and you can suspend save as well. This is a lot like the NES Classic UI, actually. It feels a lot like it, and notably, you can, if you're paying attention, you can see how the color palette in the background changes. But yeah, you can put in 4 suspend saves. They call them suspend saves, which made me think it was like, oh, it's just gonna kick you right back out to the main menu, but then no, it's just like, it's just a regular save state. That's basically all it is, which is useful on some games, especially this one, because this one's only got one continue alongside games like Double Dragon 3. The most you get in the way of instructions, though, are these, which are basically just control layouts, and you have to figure out the rest for yourself. Most of these games are actually pretty simple, so there isn't anything particularly wrong with this, but there are a couple of things where you're wondering what the hell's going on sometimes, and you think to yourself, oh, I have to go look at the control manual and then just assume the rest. You can also edit the controller settings and stuff from in here too, reset and back to game select. You do, of course, also have game descriptions, which are different in, like, it's just, it's weird. It feels a bit rushed, like I don't know if this is just me or not, but some of these descriptions are a little bit weird in how they're written, and how they just seemingly try to tell you everything, but at the same time tell you really nothing. I would have loved to have had some sort of, like, historical recollection of all these games, like, back when Technos was formed, because Technos were the one who developed all these games, and you see their logo on basically everything post, like, Double Dragon. And I would have loved to have had some sort of, like, historical record of what they were doing when these games were made, you know? A few extras like that, maybe even like the original instruction manuals, you know? Just something like that. Instead, it's just these weirdly brief game descriptions, and it feels beginner unfriendly, because I'm not too familiar with Kunio-Kun. I know the general deal, with the franchise, but I feel like that, like, when you read the description like this, Todo Momoru's plan to destroy the other schools at the sports festival failed. He was not discouraged nor is scheming up the perfect plan to destroy the others for good. I feel like an overall story summary would have been a lot better for this, because this franchise really did have like an actual plot to it. Something along those lines that just would have made it easier for newcomers to just drop in and take a look at the overall quote-unquote plot. But that's what we get, I suppose. So it just feels a bit light on the ground on extra features. As far as I can tell, all the games work and look as they're supposed to, and they really did get rid of some of the lag, although there are a couple of games which are there are a couple of games which are dramatically slow. Like, for example, the Hockey Club game, Slip and Slide Madness. It is dreadfully slow. Like, the scrolling is very slow, the overall control feel is a bit iffy, it just doesn't feel right. A lot of the games are okay though. Like, they did a pretty good job in making the games just overall smooth and feeling playable, at least in the ones that actually stand a chance of that, because there are a few games in this collection which are not very good, and I'd like to talk to you about all of them in order, and I'm probably going to put up footage of them as I go. I do have footage of all of them, so hopefully we can make this work. I apologize if that music's very loud. I'll probably turn it down and replace it with something a little bit weird now, but yeah, it's a little bit frustrating. But it's nice that the music actually switches when you move between games. So the first thing that I played, because I played by release date, is Nekketsu Renegade Kunio-Kun, also known as Renegade. These two games are the same thing. They are just like different in graphics and localization, because as I said before, they localize both these games in English, but one of them feels different from the other. And it's a pretty simple brawler beat 'em up where you have to go around beating the crap out of people to, I believe in Renegade it's to save your girlfriend. In Kunio-Kun, I can't remember, I think it was your friend being kidnapped, but I mean, it doesn't make that much difference because the game isn't very good. The beat 'em up action is kind of sloppy, if I'm being honest, because when you're throwing punches out at people, it can be very hard to tell whether you're hitting or whether they're hitting you. And it can be frustrating to know when you can safely approach an enemy and when you can't, especially with enemies that have like sticks that they swing at you to beat the crap out of you with. They can be really frustrating to deal with because it's very hard to get close to them without you actually taking a hit. So the only real way to actually go in and hit them is via using jump kicks. And it just ends up feeling a bit random when you get grabbed, when you get hit, when you manage to get a hit out without taking a hit yourself. And it's not helped out by the fact that the game has one life, no continues, and you get sent all the way back to the beginning, which means that even after 5 minutes of trying, I couldn't get past the first stage. Renegade is basically the same game except with a palette swap, and it's got the same set of problems, so it ends up feeling really frustrating, and thankfully this is not where the series stayed, and well, it actually took a really big change. It's kind of impressive just how much it changed in between this entry and, well, basically the Dodgeball game, and then River City Ransom as we all know it. So yeah, as I said, Renegade is just the same game with a palette swap. It is about the same, it's okay, but it's just not that much fun to play today, if I'm being honest. Double Dragon, excuse me. There we go. Alright, so Double Dragon is actually a lot of fun to play. There's a few enemies which kind of kick your ass, like I hate those purple guys on Mission 3, for example, but it's clear that they made a massive step up in both quality and playability with this one. Punching and kicking is really satisfying. The game's got a unique little system where the more you manage to hit people, the more moves you unlock, so you end up getting more and more variable throughout, variable in the sense that you've got more moves to use throughout the game. And it's definitely a lot less of a random, are you going to get punched or not fest. Enemies are a lot more predictable, but at the same way they're a lot more dangerous, so you need to make sure that you're in just the right range to throw out punches, otherwise they will be able to hit you back. You've got a good selection of moves. The game looks and sounds great, actually. It still looks and sounds good today, and the just overall quality of this one game is really well done. I'm not entirely sure what else to say about it. I still play Double Dragon from time to time. I didn't even grow up with it. This game came out like 10 years before I was born, so it's kind of one of those games that manages to hold up. The beat-em-up action is still good. It's still satisfying to land a good few hits on an enemy when you're just the right range that they can't fight back. Even the weapons are fun to use from time to time, even though you lose them quite quickly, although I can kind of understand that, because it'd be very easy to just cheese your way through the game. It's got some pretty interesting stage designs as well. It's a good brawler. That's what matters. It's a really good brawler. The funny thing about talking about these three games is that they're all brawlers, and there's still a few pure brawlers like Downtown Niketsu's Story, which is, you know, of course, River City Ransom, and there's a couple other ones like the historical period drama, but all of these games from now on, even like the sports ones where you think they can't really do that much damage to each other, are still about beating the crap out of each other. Hence, the Dodgeball Club, also known as Super Dodgeball. So, this is actually pretty simple as well. I really appreciate how thin on the ground the mechanics are in this one, because it means you just get to focus on the actual situation around you instead of having to worry too much about too many mechanics or all that. Sure, a lot of these games need to make use of the two buttons at the same time thing, but again, thanks to the fact that you've got that third button on the controller itself, it still works really well. So, it's got some pretty simple mechanics. You can pass the ball around, then you can do multiple different kinds of throws at them, jump throws, regular throws, special throws that you time properly, and you just have to hit the opponents enough to knock them off the field and get their health down to 0. And it's actually really enjoyable. You always have an idea of who you're going to be throwing the ball at. It always keeps the action on screen, and the AI is smart enough to keep out of the way of the ball most of the time, so all you really need to do is play intelligently and you stand a good chance of winning. I found myself playing this for a little bit longer than I really should have, because the mechanics are just that level of complex enough to not make the game boring, while at the same time being simple enough that you don't have to worry about memorizing button combinations, that it just becomes nice and smooth. There are a few games in this collection like that where they got that balance of complexity but simplicity just right, and Dodgeball is one of them, and I like to think that Super Dodgeball is just as good as well. It's actually a bit easier. It's why the footage that's playing on screen right now is actually Super Dodgeball, because I think they toned the difficulty down a bit, and it's about going across the world and beating up other teams instead of like beating up other schools in the Japan area, as is all of the Renegade games, Kunio-Kun games are like. But still, the Dodgeball game is a lot of fun, and most of these games, like after the Dodgeball game, are all based around co-op play of some kind, or competitive play as well. So, if you have friends, I will just say right now that if you've got like 2 to 4 people, some of these games would be absolutely fantastic with friends. I'll point them out as I go, but Dodgeball is definitely one of them. And I think you can actually play a co-op as well. Like, there are a few games in here that support full-on co-op too. Not just the Double Dragons, like the one that is at the very end, the Street Basketball game, actually supports like 2 players fighting against 2 AI. And that would be actually a pretty good game to play with 2 human players on one team. So the really big one, the massive one that everyone knows. If you know anything about Kunio-Kun, you know about Downtown Niketsu's Story, which is also known as River City Ransom. And it is a RPG cross brawler, and it feels just as good as Double Dragon, if not better. There's like not that much in the way of reach of your attacks, but you can still definitely get you can still definitely get a feel for just how far you can attack and just how far the enemy can attack while you're fighting them. The action is surprisingly quick, considering they're all like tiny chibi-ish characters with big heads and short arms, but the overall quality of the action itself is really good. The brawling is great. There's a lot of moves that you can not only start out with, but learn. And the game is propped up by its RPG system, where when you wander into a town, you can buy things like food that'll increase your stats to make you better at the game. And you don't actually get a game over in this one, like say Double Dragon, where you've only got like 3 lives, or Renegade Kunio-Kun when you've only got one life, but they still do a really good job at, they just throw you back to the last area and you can just grind for money if you need to, which is great. And it makes the game really enjoyable because it means all you really need to focus on is beating up dudes and taking their money. It's got more weapons than Double Dragon. It's got a fair bit more variety than Double Dragon because it's got a lot of interesting stage designs, including like little weird 2D sections where you go inside of a building and you need to platform your way up, although that's a bit finicky because your jump is kind of like those sorts of jumps where you're locked into your path and you can't really adjust it on the fly, and you have to make some weird little jumps from time to time. But this is some good shit. It is a lot of fun going around beating the crap out of other school students. In River City Ransom, I believe it got updated to games of Kidnap Your Girlfriend or something. Hang on, I can check the game description. Yeah, I hold your high school captive with, yeah, slick. Sure, okay. It's still students, but yeah, it's just a random gang from outside the school itself instead of actual school gangs. But yeah, this one actually really damn good. Would highly recommend you play Downtown Niketsu Story, also known as River City Ransom. But yes, as I said before, the localization is a bit weird between the two of these, but it's still fine. Whichever version you choose to play, it's still a really good game even to this day. Fantastic little beat 'em up. And I'm really looking forward to getting my goddamn analog pocket in so I can put off all the Game Boy Advance games I've been holding on to, one of them being River City Ransom EX. So there are a few other sports games in the pack as well, and this one is probably my favorite, Niketsu High School Dodgeball Club Soccer Story. So it is a soccer game, a pretty arcadey one in fact. You've got like 6 people to a side, you pass, you shoot, you can jump in the air to do more intense shots, and there are also special shots that you can do, which I haven't quite figured out yet because they don't really list how to do them properly in the manual. It all makes it a little bit difficult. But it's still a really good game because it's relatively light on the mechanics, but at the same time, it gives you exactly what you need in order for it to not feel boring. You've got plenty of opportunities to pass and shoot the ball, and one of the things I really like about this is that when you're not in control of the ball and it's one of your teammates, you can actually press buttons to order them to do stuff. You can order them to pass the ball to you, or you can order them to try and shoot. Sometimes they'll tell you no, but that's usually if they're like nowhere near the goal to actually take the shot. It works really well. It's nice and smooth gameplay. There's no massive adherence to the rules. Like, you've still got corners, goal keeps, and all of that, but you can freely like go about tackling people, and they'll even get like knocked out permanently if you deal enough damage to one player. So there's a little bit of a reason to go around trying to beat the crap out of people at the same time, which exists in all of these. Like, we haven't gone to the other games to really demonstrate that yet, but I mean, you got Dodgeball, which is kind of obvious what you're meant to do there, but it's still a neat idea. And it works pretty damn well. I played it for a fair bit longer than I really should have because it was just simple, but it was fun because it maintained that simplicity while being just complicated enough to not be boring. So there's a lot of things like that in this collection, actually, and that's kind of what makes this series interesting. They do just enough with the power that I had available to them because, well, NES, Famicom, they didn't have much to work with. So, Downtown Niketsu March Super Awesome Field Day. This game is kind of chaotic. It is a series of 4 different events based around the same sort of River City Ransom Downtown Niketsu Story Brawler engine, but it plays out kind of like a sports game where you have to do specific things. Like, one of the events is like a cross-country event where you basically have to try and win the race, more or less, but the better you do in every individual screen, because there's only like one screen, it's not like one long race, it's split up into multiple sections, but the better you do in the individual sections, the better you'll score. And there's a couple of other events too, like you've got a ladder that you have to climb in order to destroy a ball at the top, and then there's one which is just a full-on gladiator arena fight where you just got like 4 dudes trying to beat the shit out of each other as effectively as possible. However, these games in particular, like the Super Awesome Field Day and KunioKun Records, which is another one on the same lines, and there's another one too. basically, you have to do things like hammer away at the right directional button, and I've been playing this majorly on a Switch Pro controller, so it makes it really hard to just be tapping right on the D-pad a lot, and the AI in this game in particular, and the other one that's along these lines, is absolutely ruthless. You have no idea how hard the AI goes at you in this game. So it is definitely one of those games that's more meant for a party setup, because I can imagine 4 people trying to, like, for example, in the cross-country race, it's not just a race. You have to beat the crap out of each other along the way to make sure that they don't get there first. And you get, like, your traditional items, and you've got all your moves that you do from River City Ransom, give or take a few. I'm not going to claim to know for sure, but still. It's a lot more fun when everybody just stops in the middle of, like, a race section and beats the crap out of each other just to try and get to the goal first. But in this game, the AI is absolutely ruthless. They go straight for the goal. They go straight for you all the time. And it just doesn't seem like you can catch an even remote break. And it makes the game surprisingly difficult to enjoy in that sense. Definitely one that's meant for the multiplayer more than the single player. And that's kind of disappointing. Also, I forgot to talk about Double Dragon 2, so we're going to pop back and talk about Double Dragon 2 for a bit. And it's not as good as Double Dragon 1, but it still has a pretty good sense of gameplay about it. The punching and kicking is still satisfying. You get a couple of extra moves to play around with, which are also fun to do. The overall level design is about the same. They have this weapons and stuff you can pick up as well. It doesn't feel like that massive of a step forward from Double Dragon, but because, you know, it doesn't feel as good, but it still feels pretty good, and it's still enjoyable as a game by itself, but I still prefer the original Double Dragon. The reason why I say that is because we're about to talk about Double Dragon 3, because Double Dragon 3 is absolutely horrendous. It's probably the worst game in this collection, bar none. It's even worse than Kunio-Kun, mainly because it's got the same problem, where you've got one life, no continues, and the gameplay is even worse. It's incredibly stiff. It feels like your punches and kicks take forever to come out. It feels like they do no damage. You feel over-reliant on a certain move, which is hopping over the back of people and throwing them into a wall, because it's the only one that does any reasonable damage. And it's so difficult that I wasn't able to get past more than a couple of screens. It is legitimately a terrible game, and I absolutely despise it. And I had never played it before this point because I heard that it was the absolute worst one by a significant margin, and now that I've played it, I can't help but agree. It is absolutely dreadful. I fully recommend you don't play it. What else is there to talk about? I mean, I guess we have to move on. I feel like I've missed something, if I'm being honest, but I don't think I have. So I guess we'll just move straight on to the historical period drama. So this is basically River City Ransom, but with a slightly different historical skin. You're back in historical times. You have to go around beating the crap out of people and navigating what is basically a big open world, but there's not really that much to it. Basically, you've got people throughout the game that you can beat up and they come to you as like sidekicks. You've also got just random gangs hanging around certain towns, and you have to defeat 10 of them in the same room before a boss shows up that you can then defeat. I wasn't able to figure this out. This is why I say the manual is something that I really think they should have included. But yeah, I had to go and look up a guide to know that you actually have to stay in one area and beat 10 people, which is a bizarre concept. And this is also one that seems to be mostly affected by the high quality version changes, where they added an item, they fixed bugs, they changed a bunch of stuff related to the game's AI. It's weird how much they changed, but yeah, I will say River City Ransom is better, but this is also a nice, like, little detour from it. And, well, I mean, I would fully recommend playing River City Ransom first, but this also does okay. There's nothing particularly wrong with this one. What there is particularly something wrong with is Kunio Hockey, Slip and Slide Madness. This game is so slow and so dull that I just found it almost impossible to enjoy. Even when I skipped forth like the 5th or 6th battle, they were just kicking my ass, but I wasn't having any fun whatsoever. Your movement, scrolling, and just general control input is really sluggish the overall pace of the game is really bad, and every single game lasts for 9 minutes, which just feels like it's way too long. So the entire game just feels like a bit of a slug, a bore, an absolute waste of my time. Like, even when I was playing, like, the footage I was taking for this video, I saw that it was going up to 3 minutes, and I'm like, oh, please let this be the end. And then it went to the second period, and there's 3, and they're all 3 minutes. It's horrendously dull. It is genuinely one of the most dull sports games I've ever played. And right after coming off the soccer story, that's incredibly disappointing, because they did a really good job with the soccer game, so I don't know how they managed to screw that one up. So, surprise, KunioKun Records, the distant gold medal, is about the same as the Super Awesome Field Day, except the events are definitely more Olympics inspired, not that much in the way of beating the crap out of other people. I mean, there is one event which is just beating the crap out of other people, but the rest is kind of similar to, say, like, you know, international track and field, where you have to be constantly hammering away at right on the D-pad, way more than even Super Awesome Field Day, because that's how you dash in this game, and you have to do it for... They don't actually let you change the order of events in KunioKun Records as well. They do in Super Awesome Field Day, which is how I was able to play all the events in that one. But when it comes to this one, you're stuck kind of doing them in order, and it's just weird. It's really weird trying to hammer away at R on the D-pad while at the same time pressing buttons on the right side. And remember, I'm playing this on a Switch Pro controller, not the NES controller that it was designed for. And it just ends up being a lot less fun to play than I imagine it was back in the day, just because it doesn't feel anywhere near as responsive. I couldn't even manage to not hit, like, disqualified in the one hurdles event that I actually managed to play, just because it is, like, really weird in the way the controls work. This game was also localized as Crash and the Boys Street Challenge, which is bizarre. Like, why didn't they just call it, like, River City New Records or something like that? Because trying to localize it like this just feels weird, especially when you look at the designs on that cover. What is up with that? That looks so bizarre. It is just weird. Really, really weird. I will admit that it is my second least well, is it my second least favorite? I mean, I might call Kunio-Kun, Renegade Kunio-Kun better than it, but it's not by much. So yeah, I'm not a fan of these two games at all, really. Again, probably something that's better if you're playing with a mate, just because you'll both screw up in around the same amount. Also, I will point out that you can play these games like on individual Joy-Cons, and considering that they've only got 3 buttons each max, it's not like it's a big deal. You don't even have to worry about the shoulder buttons, really. So, Nekketsu Fighting Legend is a 2 versus 2 fighting game with the River City Ransom engine. So, you're basically just beating the crap out of teams of 2 with your 2 people. You can do things like team-up attacks while there are environmental hazards. I say it kinda feels like Smash in the sense that you've got these environmental hazards all over the place that you want to knock them into in order to deal damage, but at the same time, it's not really Smash. It's a more traditional style of game, but it's a more traditional style of fighting game, but it's a 2 versus 2 brawler on the River City Ransom engine. It's fun. There's nothing really particularly wrong with it, but it's just kind of middling in comparison to some of the other games on this list. Like, it's okay for just like 2-on-2 fighting, but at the same time, I feel like games like even like Nekketsu March Super Awesome Field Day, with its gauntlet where you have to run with like 4 people and attack each other along the way, feels a bit more in depth than just Fighting Legend, where you just end up with you attacking, like, ends up with you attacking 2 random people. Or like River City Ransom, where you're constantly having new dudes thrown at you. It just feels a bit quaint in comparison to everything else, I think is what I'm trying to say. It's okay. There's nothing particularly wrong with it. It's just It doesn't really do that much with the overall beat the crap out of everybody formula that the rest of these games work with, and it just feels kind of, you know, just middling as a result. Kunio-Kun's Nekketsu Soccer League, it's basically just an enhanced version of the soccer game, Nekketsu's Dodgeball Club Soccer Story, It's the same engine, it's got the same gameplay, it's got a few tweaks to it, like letting you do more in-depth customization of what your team AI does, and there's a few things like lightning that'll strike water, that'll knock out all of your dudes if they're standing on it. Little things like that, but it's basically the same game underneath it, and I still don't really mind that in the grand scheme of things, but it's things like, as I said, the lightning just kind of rub me the wrong way, and I kind of prefer Soccer Story in comparison, just because it's a simpler game overall, and therefore I find it to be a little bit more satisfying. But I can see why people might prefer this one, just because there's more to it. Also, I almost forgot to point out that there is Neketsu Dodgeball Club Soccer Story. This game was actually localized as Nintendo World Cup. So that's probably the reason why it never actually showed up in this collection, because they probably still own the rights to the United States version of it. But yeah, they have done this, they have got the Japanese version in here. Although, now that I am on the topic, I need to show you a clip of something. This is what happens when you tie in Soccer Story. So not only is Misako a slut, but they decided to put this into a game where... they decided to put this into a game that was probably meant for kids, teenagers at most. I find that to be kind of strange. Is that what it says in the original version? I have no idea. But I find that to be quite hilarious, which is why I put that clip in there. And the final game is Neketsu Street Basketball All-Out Dunk Heroes, which is 2 versus 2 basketball. It's no NBA Jam, but you've still got the traditional Kunio-Kun mechanics where you beat the crap out of the other players, and you've got to try and get like slam dunks in some amusingly high basketball loops. I tried for ages to figure out how to do a slam dunk, but I couldn't quite figure it out. But the game itself is still really enjoyable. You've got an AI partner who's usually pretty intelligent. You can set what tactics you want to take on for that particular team, so it doesn't you aren't playing with the exact same moves every time if you don't feel like it. The action itself is pretty good, although the scrolling is a bit slow. Overall, though, it's still a fun game. I enjoy like throwing the hoops and having it just bounce off and getting a little bit annoyed at that. But I still think this is a good game, and I think this would be a lot more fun if you were playing with a teammate that you could actively cooperate with. Just be like, hey, I'm going to pass you the ball, try and get a slam dunk. Because the AI is actually really good at getting the timing, and it feels kind of unfair. Again, the AI in these games can be a bit of a pain in the ass to deal with, but that's just kind of the way it works. So yeah, I enjoyed it. So let's count the games that I enjoyed and would recommend picking up this collection for. So we've got Double Dragon, we've got Dodgeball, we've got River City Ransom, and that only counts as one. River City Ransom and Dodgeball only count as one, but there's 2 localized versions. Double Dragon 2, the soccer game. The historical period drama was okay, so that's 6. Neketsu Fighting Legend, 6.5. Neketsu Soccer League, that's 7, and Street Basketball, that's 8. That's like 8 games that I think are decent enough to warrant picking up the collection for, and the rest are just kind of eh. I mean, admittedly, if you're willing to sit down with a couple of friends, that number goes up to like 10 or 11. But still, I'm a person who plays entirely by himself, so that's what I'm basing my opinion of the entire collection off of. And as a historical, like, artifact of a series that was absolutely massive in Japan, I would absolutely recommend picking it up for that alone, because who would have thought they'd actually go to the effort, however weird or just kind of lazily they translated it, who would have thought they'd go to the effort of localizing all of the Japanese versions of the games in English? That is a ridiculous effort, and if you're a sort of fan of historical games, like I am, this collection is worth picking up for that alone. But if you're just someone who enjoys some beat-em-ups and some spin-offs of some beat-em-ups and you don't really care about this particular series, it's hard to recommend, mainly because I don't know the price. I wonder if that email I sent actually has the price on it. I'd be lying if I said I could remember, but the game itself, hang on, let me just check. My email client's crashed, brilliant, but if it's something like $39.99 or anything higher than that, it'll feel kind of hard to recommend to people because you've only got a few handful of games that are actually really worth playing here. There are some good ones, don't get me wrong, but because like Double Dragon, River City Ransom in both versions by the way, Double Dragon 2, the Dodgeball game, and a couple of the other ones just after that are all good. They're all actually a lot of fun, but I don't know if they would be absolutely worth that price for someone who doesn't care about, I don't know if they'd be worth that price for someone who doesn't care about this. Alright, my client has recovered. Let me just, let's search for Kunio. To the west later this month, yada yada yada. It doesn't say how much it's going to cost, which is kind of frustrating if I'm being honest. If it's $29.99 or less, it's kind of easy to recommend, but anything higher than that, and I'd be like, nah, wait for it to go on sale. Unless you're a fan of, like, old historical games getting a decent, if not amazing, like, compilation collection, while at the same time also all being localized into English, although kind of roughly. At which case I'd recommend you buy it anyway, but if you're a fan of those sorts of games, you already knew about this collection and you already bought it when it came out in, like, Asian English territories, so what do I know? It's not bad, half the games are decent, and it's kind of hard to recommend if it's anything higher than, like, 20 or 30 bucks, but if it's around that price, it's probably alright. A lot more fun if you've got friends, though. I'd really like to know how the online play works, but chances are it's not going to work. Or at least I'm not going to find anyone to play with, and even then, these are Nintendo Entertainment System games. They probably really rely... Oh, they've been okay, character names can't be changed, and passwords will not be visible. Okay. That's all fine. Is there anyone actually playing this right now? There probably isn't. Didn't think so. Alright. This has been Blue Maxima, and I will see you all next time.